Today, we meet at a moment when the tectonic plates of global politics are not merely shifting, they're grinding. Mohammed bin Salman, once treated as an international outcast after the brutal murder of Jamal Khashoggi, has now been welcomed to Washington with a pageantry typically reserved for state visits, complete with fighter jet flyovers and trillion-dollar promises. The Trump administration appears to be elevating strongman diplomacy to a governing philosophy. Meanwhile, U.S. foreign policy is being simultaneously redefined by competing power centers inside the administration. As global efforts to combat foreign disinformation intensify from Europe to Brazil to the United Nations, Washington is stepping back, weakening institutions meant to safeguard information integrity. Across Africa, authoritarian leaning networks, many backed by American conservative groups, are trying to reshape laws and norms around sexuality, gender, democracy, and sovereignty. And in Asia, Japan faces a crossroads in its human rights posture as China flexes regionally and democracies strain to maintain coherence in a fragmenting international order. Newly surfaced documents are raising profound questions about Israel's global footprint, revealing how the Netanyahu government, former Prime Minister Ehud Barak, and intelligence-adjacent networks leverage Jeffrey Epstein as an informal conduit for political access and covert influence across Africa, Russia, and Asia. The emergence of these shadow intermediaries blurs the line between official diplomacy and outsourced statecraft, exposing a transnational ecosystem operating well beyond traditional oversight. And with the rapid collapse of the ceasefire, followed by immediate and forceful Israeli strikes, the world is now confronting not only the fragility of regional stability, but the deeper political and strategic instability driving Israel's decisions in this moment of global realignment. In other words, this is not simply a story about foreign policy. It's a story about what kind of world order we're living through, who gets to define the rules, and whether those rules are anchored in democratic values or transactional expediency. Dr. Richard Haass, the President Emeritus of the Council on Foreign Relations, is here with us again today, a statesman whose career has spanned administrations, conflicts, peace processes, and inflection points that have reshaped the international system as we know it. Dr. Haass, thank you for being back on the political mic.
Good to be with you, Mr. Taylor.
Dr. Haass, we've witnessed one of the most dramatic rehabilitations in modern diplomacy. Mohammed bin Salman moving from global pariah to gilded guest of honor in Washington. What does this moment tell you about how the Trump administration understands morality, accountability, and alliances?
Well, to be fair, he was already moving beyond pariah status during the Biden administration. Candidate Biden described him as a pariah. President Biden met with him. It was a reflection, a concession to reality. Saudi Arabia matters. It matters given its energy reserves, given the strength of its economy, given its reach in the region, its influence in the Arab and Islamic world. So that's simply a fact of life. And at some point, foreign policy needs to reflect facts of life. It's been 7 years since the murder of Jamal Khashoggi. Doesn't get any better with retrospect. But I think the question any president would have had to face, whether it was a Kamala Harris or some other Republican, is essentially at what point, as awful as what happened was, do you move beyond it? Where I took issue with the Trump administration, though, was it went farther than it had to. President Trump essentially absolved the Crown Prince of any role. The CIA made it clear that he was, shall we say, involved. So the president went much further than the facts warranted, and he needed to be. And I think it's a reflection more broadly in his administration that considerations of democracy and human rights don't count for much. But again, the general trend, if you will, which was moving Saudi Arabia, the kingdom, out of pariah status and rehabilitating it, dealing with it, I think was well underway and would continue no matter who is sitting in the Oval Office.
And what does it mean when, or what does it mean for U.S. credibility when a president dismisses the findings of his own intelligence agencies regarding the murder of Jamal Khashoggi? Does this create a precedent that other authoritarian partners will exploit? And of course, this is, of course, coming off of Donald Trump in his first term, publicly casting doubt on his own intelligence community in front of Vladimir Putin.
Well, exactly. That's why it's not a precedent, as you correctly say. This president has done it before when the findings of the intelligence community didn't suit him. It'd be very hard to be an intelligence professional, seeing your output treated as in this way. I think it probably complicates the willingness of other countries who have been traditional intelligence partners to continue to work closely with us. And I think it eats away at some of our standing and credibility when the president says things that are at odds with what the intelligence community has found, and I think with what most fair-minded observers would hold to be the truth. Coming back to the meeting with the Crown Prince, what was interesting to me, the Crown Prince's response to the question after the president spoke was actually much more nuanced than anything the president said. And the Crown Prince said what happened was awful, won't happen again. Again, he didn't take responsibility for it. He's not going to do that. But I thought in his own way, he was signaling that a mistake was clearly made by himself and others, which I took as a sign that he, of some, he's changed, and he at times admits it, that he's changed since he first gained power and authority.
And of course, in the Oval Office yesterday, Mary Bruce of ABC News asked or challenged President Trump and the Saudi Arabian prince by asking the president about his family's involvement, business involvement with Saudi Arabia, and of course, the Crown Prince's involvement with the murder of Jamal Khashoggi. And of course, she was met with a hostile response from the president. And what was amazing to me about the exchange is how folks just allowed that to happen, where Donald Trump is able to berate a respected journalist for asking a legitimate question about his personal business dealings. Any other president, with the kind of ties and connections with this country would have definitely been asked the same thing, but would not have responded in that matter. What are your thoughts about that?
It was not a good moment, to say the least. I was extremely uncomfortable watching it. It's let me break it down into two parts. One was the way in which President Trump dealt with a professional journalist. I thought it was totally unwarranted. Mm-hmm. I didn't expect the other journalists in the room to stand up. I would be asking a lot for them to risk their own ability. I don't know, but I would hope that the leadership of her network would go to bat for her and stand up for her. But look, a free press is essential to the functioning of a democratic government. So to intimidate a journalist, to threaten to take away a license of her company was, to me, a truly unfortunate moment. And there's the larger issue you got at, Mike, which is the relationship between the president and his family on one hand, business dealings, whether it's crypto or investment and so forth. And again, there's reasons again to be uncomfortable, to question, how would I put it? The norms are, it's not simply that the norms of the past are not being followed, but there's the question about whether there's the necessary separation between, if you will, church and state here, between family and government and family and country. I don't have any evidence that you don't have, so I'm not going to sit here and make any charges. But I thought it was a totally legitimate issue to raise.
And Saudi Arabia is offering massive investments, access to sovereign wealth funds, and a new strategic partnership. Is the United States essentially re-embracing the logic of oil for security, or are we watching the birth of something qualitatively different?
I think it's different. Saudi oil, as significant it is not as significant as it was. It's a smaller percentage of global energy output than it was. Price of oil is low. The United States is the world's biggest producer. I think the relationship with Saudi Arabia has other dimensions, including the financial, not just oil, including the regional and so forth. So and also this administration's been attracting or encouraging investment from anyone and everyone. Every ally, every partner increasingly is being pressured, I'll use that word, to invest in the United States. That's part and parcel of the Trump approach to the world. I think you have to also look at what we're prepared to give, whether it's F-35s, whether it's advanced technology, chips, or what have you, and so forth, and ask whether all that is warranted whether one is comfortable with that, given Saudi Arabia's proximity to China, given promises we've made to Israel about protecting its so-called its qualitative edge. So I think it goes in both directions. But the idea that we're encouraging Saudi investment in the United States, shall we say, is hardly the exception. It's actually the rule now. We encourage just about everybody to invest in the United States.
If Israel's concerned with a F-35 transfer, and U.S. national security officials are worried about China's access to sensitive technology through Riyadh, what guardrails, in your view, should exist? And do you believe the current administration, the Trump administration, is respecting them?
One, I don't know, but that's really where Congress will come in. Traditionally, when you have various types of advanced exports, particularly arms, there's end user controls. There's the question in the case of certain military capabilities, whether you, to use a term we used to sometimes use, detune them, whether you don't necessarily provide the most advanced state of the art, but something that's good, if not necessarily the best, and it might not be necessary in the context of the Middle East. Good may be plenty good enough. So that's something that Congress has often done, and then there's certain ways on the ground. But I don't want to claim more than we can. It's always based in part on trust about the behavior of the receiving side, that they won't pass on or give certain technologies or give access to them, whether it's China, Russia, or anybody else. And I think you have to just monitor it as best you can. And if you should ever see a violation, then it's got to have real consequences.
The Trump administration has aggressively withdrawn from or undermined multilateral institutions, UN bodies, the ICC, global climate frameworks. How does this erosion of institutional engagement affect America's long-term influence, and what fills in that void?
Well, I think it's funny you mention it, only because the day before the Crown Prince showed up in the Oval Office, the United States had a pretty big win in the UN Security Council by getting the 20-point plan and all that approved by the Security Council. So I'm just saying, like most administrations, its approach to multilateralism tends to be a la carte. And there the administration was willing to have the UN involved because it got support. In case, say, of climate, I'll be honest with you probably won't like my answer, but involvement in multilateralism doesn't matter much. I look at these meetings going on every year. There's one going on now in Brazil, the so-called Conference of Parties, the COP. We're up to number 30. They don't matter. Mm. So it's the symbolism of the United States not being there. I think the much bigger issue is the United States is not a serious participant in the production and export of solar, wind, and nuclear, and so forth. China is gaining not just economically, but strategically. It's going to be intimately involved in the energy systems, the infrastructure of countries all over the world. So I think it's a massive own goal that we are not competing for these contracts for reasons, I'll be honest with you, that I scratch my head. It's almost a cultural aversion the administration has to anything that is not fossil fuel. I find it mystifying. I think our policy ought to be all of the above. I mean, I'm not enthusiastic about coal, but I am enthusiastic. I'm a realist about oil and gas. So I simply don't understand why we don't have an all of the above energy policy, why we don't have one that has a serious investment in renewables or alternatives, however you want to classify them. So I don't think we lose a lot by not participating in the COP process. The World Health Organization, it failed to work during the COVID outbreak. It couldn't discipline China. I think the biggest issue where we're paying a real price is our undermining the global trading regime through tariffs and the rest. Look, I think what it highlights is, you may love it, you may hate it, but this administration is less isolationist than it is unilateralist. And the president likes improvisation. He likes transactionalism. He doesn't want to be tied down by institutions. I think that's unfortunate, because I think institutions have real advantages, whether they're alliances or trade organizations or health organizations, what have you. But that's not how he rolls, and that's simply a fact of life.
The Trump administration seems to have two foreign policy poles. You've got Vice President Vance and Secretary Rubio, sometimes operating in parallel, and then sometimes operating in tension with one another. What are the risks when a president encourages internal rivalry in the very domain that demands unity and clarity?
I actually think it's a bigger risk if he doesn't encourage or allow rivalry. Any president who only gets one set of views, a kind of a homogenized white bread approach, is going to get bad advice. He'll get lowest common denominator, or people will be scared to point out what's wrong with, or the shortfalls or the risk of what's coming up. So I worry that's too much the case. I wish there were more debate, as best I can tell, within the administration. No, but once a policy is decided by the president, then you need everyone to get on board. So I think there's a big difference between an array of voices in the policy deciding or making stage as opposed to an array of policies when you get around to implementation. Then you need coordination. You can't allow freelancing and the like. But up to that point, up to the decision, I believe presidents are well served by a chorus of voices where people are not singing from the same hymnal. And they get in trouble when everyone is. And one of the reasons that we ended up in Iraq in 2003, there wasn't nearly enough debate about the risks and downsides of going in, the alternatives that were available. People like me who had doubts were essentially shut out. And I think, quite honestly, 43 was not well served by that process. So I hope there's a range of voices, whether it comes to what we're doing in Venezuela or Ukraine or China or the Middle East. My concern, quite honestly, is there's not enough debate, and the president has siloed too many things. So Witkoff does this and Rubio does that, or Hegseth does that. And that, to me, that's a mistake. I actually think it's better when you have a much more robust clash of views.
And speaking about Venezuela, reports indicate that the president has authorized the CIA to prepare covert operations inside Venezuela while simultaneously pursuing back-channel negotiations with Maduro. What risks arise when diplomacy and covert pressure advance in tandem without transparent objectives?
Well, two separate things. The fact that you may have different tools, you have overt military force being marshaled in the region. You've got some form of covert action, which could reflect a multitude of things. I don't know what specifically they're going to do. You have back channel diplomacy, as you said. You've got front channel diplomacy. You've got public diplomacy. Again, as long as it fits, as long as somebody's making sure that the various pieces fit and are reinforcing, I'm not against that. It's I think the question here is, what are our objectives? The administration hasn't articulated them. My own reading of the situation, though, is we're clearly favoring regime change. Our policy is not about stopping small boats that may be carrying drugs. It's clearly about bringing about regime change. I can imagine why. The economic desire to gain access to oil there, expand production, gain access, stop the hemorrhaging of people. 8 million people have left Venezuela in recent years. Stop what drug operations are. The real question is, how are you going to get there? And the issue is, what kind of covert action, how much of it? Will you use those military forces in the region? If so, how? What happens if it doesn't work?
Right.
Do you then use more? Do you back away? I mean, so there's few things harder in international relations or foreign policy than engineering regime change. Mm-hmm. And success is both bringing about the exit of the odious regime, but also bringing something that's demonstrably better in its place and stabilizing it. So regime change can be, if you will, a long process and a rather involved one, and a really demanding one. Mm-hmm. So I'm not saying I'm for it. I'm not saying I'm against it. This regime is truly abhorrent to the people of Venezuela. It's a threat to them. It's a threat to the region. But if we're going to take action to remove it, we've got to do it in a really smart way and be prepared for ways in which it can go wrong. We've had, shall we say, some sobering experiences, humbling experiences in recent years. So we ought to be mindful of what we may be getting into.
Covert action, as you alluded to, has a long and controversial history in the United States in foreign policy. Where should the line, in your view, be drawn today?
Again, I believe in covert action in principle. The devil's in the details. It's got to be carried out consistent with the law. We don't do assassination. It's got to be carried out with congressional oversight. It could just be the Gang of Eight. It could be something larger. As I said, it's important that it be done in such a way that it's coordinated with, it fits with the rest of U.S. policy. You tend to get in trouble when covert action is going in one direction and overt policy is going in another. It's better when they're consistent. They're just doing it in different complementary ways. But I think it's a potentially useful tool. I don't think there's any, maybe this reflects my career in government, but to me, I weigh it like I weigh any other tool. Do I think it's going to be effective? I think you've also got to ask, in the case of covert action, what happens if it gets exposed? What are the costs or risks of that? I mean, we've had covert actions that have been exposed, like the Bay of Pigs. We've had covert actions, smaller things, but we have a lot of covert actions that you've never heard of. Often you don't hear about the successes. So my view is, again, it's part of the toolkit, and it just got to be looked at in detail in a particular circumstance. But I have zero moral qualms with it as an instrument per se.
President Trump's boycott of the G20 summit in South Africa and his rhetoric about genocide among white farmers reflect a deeper pattern of U.S. conservatives intervening in African domestic debates. How should we understand this through the lens of U.S. foreign policy?
Well, it's a selective form of intervention. When you get involved in things like democracy, human rights, protection of minorities, it's better when you're consistent. Otherwise, you open yourself up to allegations of opportunism, of selective indignation. So, the two places you mentioned, Nigeria, South Africa, is where the voice is here. Clearly, there's some awful things going on in Nigeria. Christians are being killed there. Whether it amounts to a genocide or not, I think is a debate that's going on. Whatever's going on, even if it doesn't amount to genocide, is not good. The question is, what can you do about it? What's going on in South Africa seems somewhat exaggerated to me. And again, the question is, what are you prepared to do about it? And again, there's a lot of things going on in Africa and the rest of the world we don't seem to be paying attention to. So it looks a little bit to me, inconsistent and opportunistic. So again, if the administration wants to make human rights, wants to make the protection of threatened minorities and populations a centerpiece of its foreign policy, well, let's have a conversation about it. That's a big commitment, because there's an awful lot of threatened minorities and populations around the world, and the tools for helping them are, shall we say, imperfect and potentially expensive. But I don't see that as the case. I see this as more selective, and as a result, I think it loses some of its moral force. Though again, even if it is selective, I'd still be, I'm open to thinking about it in a supportive way if it can be demonstrated that what is going on is truly bad, and two, you've got some useful things to do about it where the benefits outweigh the costs. Again, this type of internal intervention, though, and what's going on in other societies tends to be really, really difficult. I mean, even if the morality is pretty clear, the feasibility tends to be tough.
Earlier this year, the New York Times reported that the Trump administration was incentivizing South African farmers to come over to the United States, while simultaneously cracking down on its southern border policies. What do you make of that apparent discrepancy for critics who would say, well, this is obviously evidence of racial bias, where white South African farmers are being incentivized to come and take lands in states like Alabama and Mississippi, while, brown folks coming across the border are being unfairly targeted, and the use of ICE, the militarization of ICE to go into cities to drag folks out of classrooms and libraries, obviously shows a clear disparate impact or disparate treatment among these two groups.
Well, there's a couple of things in there. One is I'm a great believer in legal immigration. I think it's one of the reasons our economy and our society is as great as it is and has been. And I think we will pay a real price going forward if we do not allow significant legal immigration, particularly based not just on family unification, but based on skill sets and education. So I'd say that one. Two, I do not have any tolerance of illegal immigration. We have processes for coming in here. So I applaud efforts to close the border. I think the asylum system was out of control. It was being gamed. So whether it was, having people remain in Mexico or other things, I thought was necessary. Mm-hmm. Deportations are a whole other kettle of fish. Yeah. And the way they're being carried out by masked ICE agents and the rest seems to me raises all sorts of legal and law enforcement questions. And we've seen it cause all sorts of problems, like when it was done at a plant, I forget in what southern state with South Korean. It goes against what the administration's trying to do with encouraging investment. It's really disruptive of lives. It's often people are using force not just in an excessive way, but in an unaccountable way. So I am really uncomfortable with it, particularly it's one thing if you have solid evidence that individual X is committing crimes and he or she is here illegally. But if people are law-abiding and all that, when I think of all the challenges facing this country, that's not high on my list, to say the least. So, lots about it I'm uncomfortable with, and I hear you about double standards. I'm not going to sit here and argue with you. I hear you.
Mm-hmm. And so Africa is asserting itself more forcefully in global governance, it seems, from the BRICS BRICS expansion to G20 policy leadership. Is Washington adapting to this new reality, or is it resisting it?
I guess a couple of things. One is I'm not sure how significant the changes are that you're alluding to. Mm-hmm. I've never been a big fan of the BRICS. You may never have me back on your program, but in some of these groups or G20s and the rest, I think their impact on international relations is, shall we say, finite. I think for African countries, they would do, the biggest challenge facing most African countries is governance within their borders, their ability to deliver services to their own population. Mm-hmm. And that's going to be a growing challenge as populations go up significantly. Mm-hmm. Regionalism in Africa needs to be strengthened. So more than Africa's involvement in global arrangements, I'd say is Africa's involvement in African arrangements. Mm-hmm. And there's a lot of crises and struggles going on that the rest of the world's not going to be terribly helpful. It's really up to Africa, and it's not meeting the challenge in many of the crises within its borders. Look, this administration is not paying much attention to it. Mm-hmm. Whatever to Africa, full stop. It's not an area of great power competition. There's no, the domestic demand for it is low. Even African Americans have not been a powerful voice. Obviously there are exceptions, but it's not a priority for most. And then what the administration has done are things that affect our ability to influence Africa. For example, the cuts in AID. Mm-hmm. Are truly regrettable. I mean, if I were going to put my finger on one thing that bothers me about our policy towards Africa, it would be the cuts in AID. That's a part of where a lot of people were being kept alive by American assistance, and we're in the business then of estimates, but I don't know how many thousands of people have probably lost their lives because they no longer have access to food and medicine and the like. So that's, if I could fix one thing, I would probably start there. But I have a long list of other things I would do as well. But I don't sit up and take notice about a greater African voice in this or that global multilateral fora. That doesn't really excite me a whole lot.
Do you see a strategic cost for the United States when Africa increasingly turns to China, the EU, or multilateral frameworks for partnership and legitimacy?
It's a good question, and the answer is yes. We alluded to mentioned one before, which is in the alternative energy area. So if China is going to be like building electricity grids for countries and providing this or that alternative, it's going to give them tremendous access to economies and societies. and they're going to have people on the ground, and who knows where that will lead with. And that's true, by the way, not just of Africa, Latin America. The tariffs are another thing. And the interruption in trade relationships, the drop in exports that we've just seen coming to the United States. Other countries are going to reorient their economic relationships. It used to be that trading with us was an advantage. Now trading with us has become, to some extent, risky for countries because it then gives us leverage. We can cut off the trade or reduce it through tariffs or what have you. So my guess is, yes, we're going to create, at a minimum, economic opportunities for others, at a minimum. But in the case of China, as we saw with Belt and Road, the Chinese don't compartmentalize economic opportunities from strategic opportunities. And they'll pursue an all of the above sort of way of getting greater involvement in and influence with the society in question.
France, Brazil, and the United Nations recently have been building new international frameworks to counter foreign disinformation and protect climate information integrity. And it seems like while that's going on, Washington has dismantled many of its own mechanisms to combat foreign disinformation. What is the long-term cost of this retreat, in your view?
Well, I hate the idea that we've shut down these radios and things like that. I long believed in the competition of ideas, and the way we demonstrate the advantages of our system, whether it's the political system, the economic system. Most important is by its example, by the example we set. When the American economy is humming, when Americans are shown to be enjoying rising living standards, when the American legal system, political system work, when they correct our flaws. I often thought things like the civil rights movement was a great foreign policy because it showed that America could recognize its flaws and do something about them. Well, how many societies can do that? Again, the goal is not to be perfect. It's become a more perfect union, and the effort, I think, is an admirable one, and that sends a powerful message to the world. And I think, but when we look flawed, and increasingly we do look flawed, let's be honest, I'm sorry to say. And then when we've stopped promoting ideas and values, whether we look the other way when terrible things happen, or we simply cut off radios or efforts by senior officials to promote certain values, I think we set in motion trends that will take a long time to reverse. So my guess is that, getting at your question in a roundabout way, the consequences will be lasting here. Because indeed, as the United States moves a little bit more towards state capitalism ourselves, it's hard for us to stand up and preach the virtues of a free market the way we used to. We've become much more interventionist, whether it's with tariffs or government stakes in companies or and so forth. So I think it's harder for us to talk the talk if we don't walk the walk, and we're not inclined to talk the talk anymore.
For someone who may be a little confused as to this administration's response to the Russian-Ukraine war, because they remember how President Trump berated Zelensky in the Oval Office in February. They remember Trump bringing Putin to a summit in Alaska. Not much seemed to be received on the American end, while Putin seemed to be elevated coming to American soil. And now Trump and Putin seem to be at odds with one another. How do you explain this this evolution that has taken place for someone who may not be familiar with all of the intricacies?
Well, I'm not sure how much of an evolution has taken place. I wish I were confident there was. But this reports as recently as today that the United States, the principal envoy for Ukraine, Steve Witkoff, has been meeting with his Russian counterpart, putting together a new quote-unquote peace plan that looks to me, at least based on news reports, and it's still a work in progress, but potentially could be quite pro-Russian in important ways, then is going to be presented to Ukraine. The whole process seems to me to be the reverse of what should happen. Normally you come up with proposals working with your friends, and then you present them to your adversaries. So I'm unfamiliar with this sequencing. I expect this will be a big story in coming days. But all along, the United States has been, in the last 9 months, a reluctant supporter of Ukraine, a limited supporter of Ukraine. We've deferred quite a lot towards Moscow. We haven't put into place the sanctions that we could have. We've run with various diplomatic ideas that were quite generous towards Moscow, even though Russia's the aggressor here. So yes, the president every now and then talks about how he's disappointed with Putin and so forth, but I don't see a real deep change or lasting change in U.S. policy. I wish there were, because quite honestly, the best way to bring this war to an end, and the president's right to want to end this war, would be to be much tougher on Russia, much more supportive of Ukraine, to disabuse Vladimir Putin that time is on his side, that if he just holds out long enough, Western and particularly American support will fade, and Ukraine will either fall or have no choice but to give him what he wants. So again, I applaud the ends of American policy in terms of wanting peace, and I just disagree fundamentally with the means. I think the president, in many ways, is sabotaging his own policy.
Dr. Haass, when you look at the past rhetoric from both sides between Israel and Hamas, what does the near immediate breakdown of the ceasefire that the president apparently brokered recently actually tell us about the structural incentives shaping Israeli and Hamas decision making? Was the ceasefire ever designed to hold, or was it inherently vulnerable from the moment it was brokered?
Well, it was designed to hold, and I'd say now it's partially holding. I mean, you could say the glass is half full or half empty. It's not all out war or anything like that again. It's not perfect. It's not complete, but it's, we've seen a lot worse. But I was skeptical that it could be much more. I mean, Hamas is not going to disarm. There'd be no way of verifying that it's going to disarm. It doesn't accept Israel. And there's those in Israel who believe that unless Hamas is eliminated militarily, fighting must continue. They don't want a Palestinian state. So I'm not sure at the moment you've got the prerequisites on either side of diplomatic progress. In order to have any agreement in any, I've written about this. I've been an envoy to more conflicts than I can think of as a U.S. government official. You need leadership on the various sides to the dispute that are more than anything else, they have to be willing and able to compromise. And in the case of Hamas, it's able to compromise. There's zero will.
Yeah.
And in the case of Israel, again, this coalition is couldn't compromise, but you could form another coalition that could. Or you could, after elections, you could, if you had somebody run to get a mandate. Again, the compromise would be modest, it would be conditional, but things could move in a different direction. I just don't think you at the moment have parties to work with.
Yeah.
And so I think what the agreement was an agreement to bring back the hostages, which thankfully was obviously, thank God, happened. Palestinian prisoners were released. More food aid and humanitarian aid's getting in. You've got a reduction in hostilities, but I'm not sure we get all that much farther than this. Gaza is on its way to being partitioned. And I simply, the language, let's say two other things. One is, it's going to be very hard to establish a stabilization force because it would have to be willing. It's not a peacekeeping force. It would have to be a war fighting force. And I don't know if anyone has the stomach for that. And then it's a long ways between where we are and having a serious diplomatic political process. And the 20-point plan gets awfully thin and awfully vague when we start talking about political goals and how to achieve them. So, I'm skeptical. I don't mean to sound cynical. And I think this is ultimately terrible for Palestinians. I think it's dangerous for Israel. But at both sides at the moment, I think are held back by their leaders. And the only way I know to break it would be if the United States would play a much larger, much more forceful role. And going way beyond what we did in the 20-point plan. And I haven't seen signs that we're prepared to do it, but I think that's what it will take. And even then, it's a difficult undertaking, but it would mean the United States would have to become a much more forceful advocate for where things need to go from here.
And the last question, Dr. Haass, in light of the avalanche of emails that came from the Epstein estate, right before the House voted to send to release the Epstein files. The Senate confirmed unanimously to open the Epstein files. Um, there was a picture painted of Jeffrey Epstein, a long dismissed as a lone financier, acting as an informal broker for Israeli intelligence across Africa, Russia, and Mongolia. From the standpoint of international norms, how unprecedented is it for a private individual with criminal liabilities to be this deeply embedded in intelligence diplomacy?
Mike, first of all, I was hoping we'd get through an entire podcast without hearing the name Jeffrey Epstein. I was hoping we could make this an Epstein-free zone. Second of all, I know nothing about what you're saying. I've heard certain speculation. I have no idea. I largely see this as a moral or immoral tale about individuals associated with him doing all these things that are abhorrent, disgusting, what have you. And anyone who came into contact with him was one way or another sullied. Whether it had a larger international, I don't know. Again, I heard the speculation. I haven't seen any evidence. So I'll just leave it there. But even without that, it is a sordid tale.
Well, Dr. Haass, thank you so much for your clarity. It always amazes me how you were not chosen yet for Secretary of State.
Yeah, well, I appreciate the vote of confidence, but when I look at the political horizon, it may well stay that way.
Thank you so much for your depth of insight that you brought to the conversation. With that being said, that's going to conclude this episode of the Political Mic. Thank you, Dr. Haass.
Thank you, Mike. You take care.
You too, sir.
Hi, it's Mike Taylor, the host of the Political Mike podcast. If you like what you heard tonight, I want to invite you to subscribe to our YouTube channel. I also want to ask you to please follow along on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, iHeartRadio, TuneIn, and Amazon Music. You can also follow along and keep up with the conversation through our Telegram channel. Follow us on Twitter at @ThePolyMike, and follow us on Instagram. Thank you so much, and no matter what part of the political spectrum that you fall on, I want to encourage you to stay engaged, stay a part of the conversation, and stay informed. Thank you.